So the MD-11 is quite a distinctive looking plane with its 3 engines rather than the usual 2 or 4. For that reason, and because it's the last of the heavy tri-jets to ever be produced, and perhaps many others, the MD-11 has gathered a fan base, and I'm about to piss them all off. As iconic as the plane is for its uniqueness, they're also somewhat iconic for something else: their accidents. For those who are not a fan of MD-11s, they might see them for their somewhat troubled safety record, like the Ford Pinto of planes. Like the Pinto, the development of this plane left the fuel tanks somewhat vulnerable to breaking and exploding. For the MD-11, this can happen when the plane lands too hard. It can cause the wings to break, rupturing the fuel tank, and the remaining part of the plane with all the cargo and passengers on board would roll over on its back before coming to a complete stop. Over the years, 3 MD-11s ended up this way, and the plane became well known for these accidents, especially with their unique belly-up resting positions. Most people point to a whole bunch of reasons for why they keep ending up this way: the small horizontal stabilizer, high landing speed, creating a plane that can be unforgiving to fly, and of course, good old pilot error. But I'm not going into detail about those factors. Most of everybody had already covered them, and we all know those are the factors that made the planes crash in the first place. Instead, I'm going to draw attention to something that has always been left out of the discussion: the MD-11's sacrificial landing gears. What's wrong with them, and how they contributed to the planes rolling over. By the way, before we get started, I can already sense some of you MD-11 lovers are already getting restless. And I get it, nobody likes to have their favorite plane be crapped on. I understand that feeling myself, especially since the target of criticism last time around was on my favorite plane, and I can confirm that I still hate myself. So please stick around till the end, it'll make sense by then. Cause, you don't want to make a comment about something that I already covered, right? That being said, let's get started. The MD-11 was designed by the company McDonnell Douglas during the great episode of the 1980s. It was designed to be a massive overhaul of the DC-10 that the company had built for over a decade. To make sure they don't spend too much money on research and development, they took the general DC-10 design and began tweaking it to make a plane that is more efficient. They shrunk the horizontal stabilizer, upgraded the engines, lengthened the fuselage, and changed a whole bunch of other stuff that I never bothered to research about. The end result was the MD-11, a plane that carried more passengers and cargo further and more efficiently than the DC-10. But all this came at a cost. First, its own company. The lackluster improvements in performance and having one too many engines made the plane less profitable for McDonnell Douglas than they had hoped. And second, the various changes like making the horizontal stabilizer smaller made the plane less forgiving to fly than the original DC-10. Landing speeds are higher, and some pilots recall the plane as being more difficult to control. Now, with proper flying techniques, it's possible to remedy the danger of these factors. But it wasn't enough to prevent a series of hard landing accidents from happening over the past 30 years. Most of them resulted in damaged landing gears and some wrinkling of the fuselage. But 3 of these accidents stood out from all the rest: FedEx Flight 14, China Airlines Flight 642, and FedEx Flight 80. During these crashes, the planes impacted the ground with one of their landing gears, causing them to lose their left or right wing, flip onto their backs, before sliding to a stop. Needless to say, planes don't usually do that. So MD-11s became well known for this phenomenon. In the end, the 3 accidents were blamed on a combination of pilot error and the tricky behavior of the plane. That's the typical conclusion, and is where the narrative usually ends. But that answer never felt satisfying to me. The narrative explains why the planes ended up crashing in the first place, but it doesn't explain how a landing gear failure can lead to a wing falling off. Now it may sound silly, and I can hear some of you already going, "Well, it crashed, of course stuff's gonna break." Well, sure, in all 3 accidents, the planes did come down way harder than they were rated for, so of course they were gonna break. But how they break matters. You see, planes don't just break however they wish to. It's not like every time a pilot messes up, the plane is legally entitled to turn itself into aluminum confetti. That would be dumb. So regulations require aircraft manufacturers to design some parts to hold tight, while others to break in certain ways. Engines, for example, are designed to contain fan blade failures, and the pylons they're attached to are designed to break cleanly away if an engine goes unhinged. The same goes for landing gears. As mentioned in the previous vid, landing gears on modern airliners are sacrificial and are designed to shear away safely if they need to. But once again, that was a YouTube short, so nobody cared. So let's start from the bottom. The job of landing gears is to allow the plane to rest neatly on the ground and to absorb energy of the wheels whenever they're touching the ground. They are pretty important parts of the plane, assuming you want to fly them more than once. For most commercial airliners, one would be attached near the front of the fuselage, known as the nose gear, and the beefiest ones would be attached to the wings, known as the main landing gears. For the MD-11, there's an extra one on the belly, but it's irrelevant to the story, so we'll just ignore it. They are designed to be strong enough to handle all sorts of airplane-related activities. Takeoffs, landings, drifting, you name it. But they are not designed to be attached to the plane at all costs. For example, if the plane were to crash land, parts of the plane are gonna break, and what breaks depends on the weakest link. If the landing gear is designed to be stronger than everything else around it, then the impact energy will be channeled to some other part of the plane to break. Perhaps more critical parts, like the wing, which usually houses the fuel tanks. Want to create the strongest landing gear ever? Go ahead, it will just cause the fuel tanks to explode. But that is dumb. So once again, regulations were put in place to ensure landing gears will break away safely, instead of breaking fuel tanks during a crash. A typical solution to make the landing gears sacrificial is to use fuse pins, bolts that are designed to break under a set load. This allows the engineers to predict and design scenarios for how a landing gear can break away safely. To do so, fuse pins are strategically located throughout landing gears, so they can break away in the pattern that we all want them to. Fortunately, the vast majority of fuse pins are never put to use in this way, and instead spend their entire lives happily keeping landing gears mated to their planes. But for a handful of them, they were. Like the ones on board Asiana Flight 214. In 2013, as the Asiana plane was on approach to San Francisco Airport, improper management of the plane's engine thrust and descent rate caused the plane to land short of the runway. The main landing gears impacted a seawall, shearing them off. But thanks to the fuse pins doing their job, the landing gears broke away safely without damaging the fuel tanks. The fuel didn't catch fire, buying time for the people to escape and limiting the number of fatalities to 3 people. This accident is a largely successful example for how fuse pins and the concept of sacrificial landing gears can work. And here lies the question for the MD-11. Why didn't their landing gears break away safely? They were equipped with sacrificial landing gears and fuse pins as well. But from all 3 rollover accidents, the investigators found that the landing gears did not separate away safely during the crashes, and even selfishly took out an entire wing with it. So how can something like that happen? Well, it seems the investigators were asking the same questions, and all 3 teams pointed to the same answer. The MD-11's landing gears were never designed to break away in a hard landing. How is that even allowed? While the MD-11 was designed with sacrificial landing gears, they were only designed to break away from an event of excessive drag loads, not vertical loads. Drag load is the force acting from forward to back. Landing gears typically feel this force when the wheels first contact the ground before they start spinning, known as spin-up and spring-back loads, and also when the pilot apply the brakes. But they also feel this force in an accident, if the wheels run into something. Vertical loads, on the other hand, is the force acting, well, vertically. This force also comes into play when the plane lands. The moment the plane touches down, the landing gear transitions from doing nothing to taking on the weight and vertical inertia of the entire plane, changing the plane's rate of descent to 0. The harder you come down, the higher the vertical load. When the plane comes down too hard, this is the load to worry about. Basically, the MD-11's landing gears were designed to break away if it runs off the runway and into a Pinto, but not if it comes down too hard. Now, why weren't they designed to break under vertical loads? Well, the manufacturer was questioned about this, and here's what they said. Creating a reliable vertical fuse can only be accomplished by adding weight and complexity. They also added that doing so could have a cascading effect in that the total aircraft structure would have to be strengthened to absorb the additional energy. Basically, it's too much work and too expensive. Keep in mind that McDonnell Douglas was already struggling financially when they designed the MD-11, and they wanted to design the plane as cheaply as they can get away with. In doing so, they may have ended up dancing around the spirit of the regulations, as the investigators found out. You see, regulations for sacrificial landing gears have existed long before the MD-11 was even on the drawing board. The rules were gradually upgraded over the years, but by the time the MD-11 came around, this was a regulation. The main landing gear system must be designed so that if it fails due to overloads during takeoff and landing, assuming the overloads to act in the upward and aft directions, the failure mode is not likely to cause blah 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 the spillage of enough fuel from any part of the fuel system to constitute a fire hazard. Now, from this regulation alone, it looks crystal clear about what the requirements are. The landing gears must be designed to fail in two different scenarios, one from excessive drag loads and one from excessive vertical loads. But actually no, because that's not the only way to interpret it. They never said anything about failing under two scenarios, only to assume overloads in both directions. As long as it's designed to break under some overload condition, that might be okay. That means if the landing gears are able to handle one of the overloads just fine without breaking, that might be okay too. In this interpretation, the landing gear would only need to be designed to fail under one scenario, which kind of simplifies the design and testing process a bit. Well, guess which interpretation they decided to go with? Of course, don't be a sucker, right? Now, in the spirit of those who wrote the regulation, was this the interpretation, the one they intended? Did they actually mean to require landing gears to be sacrificial both for drag and vertical overloads? Well, even if they did, they certified them anyways. When asked about this long after the fact, here's what the FAA said. The MD-11 was certified to CFR Title 14 Part 25 Section 721A under the interpretation at the time of certification. They also added that under today's stricter regulations, the landing gear would not meet the requirement if the airplanes were being certified under the present interpretation. So fortunately, that means more modern planes like the A350 and 787 would not have the same problems. But for the MD-11, that's not the case. Their fuse pins were only designed to break under drag overloads. For vertical loads, they just made the landing gears strong enough to handle higher descent rates, well above the requirements set by regulations. But as mentioned before, if a plane comes down hard enough, like those seen from the 3 accidents, something is gonna break. If the landing gears don't break, then something else will. In the case of the MD-11, that turned out to be the wing. During these scenarios, the first line of defense would be the landing gear's oleo struts, massive shock absorbers that are designed to absorb vertical loads from landings. But if the loads are too high, the struts will bottom out, creating a sudden spike in load. And since the landing gears are not designed to break or detach under this load, the energy naturally finds its way up the food chain to whatever kind of part the landing gear is fixed to. That part is the wing's rear spar. The rear spar is part of the plane's wing box, the main structural component that keeps the wing together. The wing box also acts as, you guessed it, a giant fuel tank. Under loads they were never designed for, as seen in the 3 accidents, the rear spar failed, leading to the failure of the rest of the wing box. With such a critical part of the wing destroyed, the wing separated from the rest of the plane, releasing all the fuel it carried. Investigators from all 3 accidents found the same failure sequence, as proven by simulations, video evidence, and the pattern of damage of parts they found in the wreckages. As an extra note, they stated in one of the reports, if fuse pins were added to allow the landing gears to break under vertical load, the damage to the fuel tanks would have been reduced to prevent the fire from developing rapidly. For that to be the case, that would imply the damage to the wing's rear spar would have also been reduced. But it's also mentioned that the failure of the wing structure may have been inevitable anyways from such an impact. If that was to be the case, then just forget everything I said for the past 10 minutes. But until someone with too much time on their hands can do accurate simulations to test out these possibilities, who knows? Since these accidents, the reputation of MD-11s have taken a hit. The unusual resting positions themselves were novel enough to raise eyebrows, and it wasn't helped by the fact that 2 of these accidents were caught on camera, and at least one of them made themselves into a classic meme. It is for this reason that I'm comparing the MD-11 to the Ford Pinto. Both vehicles, carrying the hopes and dreams of their companies, had their reputation destroyed by a series of fiery, tragic accidents from which the public remembers them for. Sure, for the MD-11, McDonnell Douglas may have been following the regulations of those days, and all 3 accidents were blamed on pilot error, cause not deciding to go around after some crazy bounces and trying to land in a tropical storm are what put the 3 planes into descent rates that made a crash all but inevitable. But the PR damage has been done. The stain of the reputation of this plane as being prone to rollovers is likely permanent, from seeing a series of nearly identical catastrophes, almost frame by frame, that are unique to that vehicle type. That's why I compared the MD-11 to the Pinto. So tough luck, MD-11 fanboys. Remember, I already criticized my favorite plane the last time around. If that's not enough for your understanding, maul all you want. But there is one more thing we can draw similarities between the 2. And this one may be the most controversial one of all. In the grand scheme of things, what if I say their dangers were over-exaggerated? What do I mean? Well, here's an alternate way of looking at this, just so you MD-11 lovers can chill for a second. The 3 MD-11 accidents we have been so concerned about killed a total of 5 people. That is tragic, but it's nothing compared to the number of fatalities from all MD-11 accidents combined, 244. The fatalities from all 3 rollover accidents only accounted for 2% of that. The vast majority came from one single accident in 1998, Swissair Flight 111. That flight alone took away 229 lives. A fire broke out and grew out of control from flammable metallized mylar insulation that was an industry-wide standard, which was, once again, allowed by regulations at the time. The plane ended up crashing into the Atlantic Ocean, killing everyone on board. The cause had nothing to do with landing gears or even the plane's controllability. If it weren't for that one accident, the MD-11 would have been one of the safest airliners up to this day. And even with it, it's not too far off from other planes from the same era. I mean, even today it's still 10 times safer than the 737 MAX series. The same was realized about the Pinto. Despite their dangerous reputation in popular culture, their safety statistics were about the same as their counterparts. As of today, many MD-11s are still flying around the world, with their ill-fated landing gear design and all. The Boeing company, the guys who took over McDonnell Douglas, actually started looking into adding vertical load fuse pins for the MD-11 to prevent more wing failures. That's what they said shortly after FedEx Flight 14, the first of the rollover accidents. Sadly, they never came up with a solution, which may have allowed 1 or 2 other rolls to happen, but perhaps they decided that the series just wasn't worth fixing. No MD-11s are carrying passengers anymore, and all the ones that are still flying are carrying cargo. That's not to mention that they're no longer in production and are gradually being retired. And with additional training for the pilots and software changes to the MD-11 to remedy unwanted motions, it may be possible that no MD-11 will ever flip again. despite the danger of the ill-fated landing gear design that is still present on every single one of them. Or maybe I already jinxed it, and another rollover accident is already happening at my local airport right now. Who knows? We'll just wait and see. And until next time, thanks for watching, and like, comment, subscribe for the algorithm. Are you serious? The script is like 7 pages long. Over 150 lines? Don't you see, like, this is why I don't like to explain every single little detail, you know? Now this thing's gonna take like over a month.